Hello, dear listener. Welcome to Calm Cloud Chronicles, where imagination drifts and stories unfold. Sit back, relax, and let the journey begin. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more soothing tales. The Skyline Sanctuary. Michael worked in a city that never truly rested. The streets pulsed with energy, horns blaring, conversations echoing off walls, and the ever-present hum of machinery. For a man who craved solitude, the city often felt overwhelming, like a chorus that never ended. Michael had moved here a few years ago, chasing the promise of a career that could finally give him stability. Yet, in its pursuit, he had traded serenity for sleepless nights. He spent his days at an office that felt as gray and lifeless as the concrete walls around him. Every evening, he trudged home to an apartment that wasn't a home, just a stopgap, with a view of a brick wall so close he could almost touch it. Life had become mechanical, routine, a cycle of work, eat, and collapse into restless sleep. One evening, after yet another grueling day, Michael couldn't bring himself to walk the familiar route home. Something about the monotony gnawed at him, urging him to break free, if only for a moment. Without thinking, he turned down an unfamiliar street, his shoes scuffing against uneven pavement as he wandered aimlessly. That's when he saw it, an alleyway tucked between two forgotten buildings, shadowed and narrow. At the end of the alley stood a staircase, old and rusting but sturdy. It led up to the roof of what looked like an abandoned factory. There was no reason to climb it. Yet, something about the way the faint glow of city lights brushed against the stairs called to him, a whisper of possibility. He hesitated for a moment, then began to ascend. The iron steps groaned in protest with every movement, but the air grew fresher as he climbed higher. When he reached the top, he froze in his tracks. Before him was a sight so unexpected that it left him speechless. The rooftop was a sanctuary, a hidden world carved out of the city's chaos. String lights crisscrossed between wooden beams, casting a warm, golden glow. An old chair, painted in peeling pastel blue, sat near a small garden of potted plants, their leaves swaying softly in the breeze. A collection of mismatched objects, lanterns, wind chimes, even a vintage thermos, decorated the space, each piece carefully placed as if they belonged to some intricate story. There was a camp stove with a tin kettle perched on it, and the faint scent of chamomile lingered in the air. Michael moved slowly, afraid that any sudden motion might shatter the dreamlike stillness. He wandered to the edge of the roof and looked out at the city. For the first time, it didn't seem overbearing. The lights shimmered like constellations, the sounds a distant murmur instead of an overwhelming roar. He leaned on the railing and exhaled deeply, a tension he hadn't even noticed loosening in his chest. The shuffle of footsteps startled him. He turned to see an older man emerging from the shadows, a steaming mug in each hand. The man was in his 60s, with a weathered face that spoke of a life well lived. He wore a patchwork vest and a kind smile, his silver hair catching the light. "Didn't think anyone else knew about this place," the man said, holding out one of the mugs. "Tea." Michael hesitated before accepting the mug. The warmth seeped into his fingers, grounding him. "Thanks. I'm Michael," he said, his voice carrying a note of surprise. "Mark," the man replied, settling into the blue chair with a soft sigh. "Been coming here for years. Built it up bit by bit. Needed somewhere quiet to escape the city, you know." Michael nodded, sipping the tea. It was chamomile, with a hint of honey. He hadn't realized how much he'd needed this, a break, a moment to breathe. For hours, the two men sat on that rooftop, sharing stories. Mark talked about his years as a chef, the people he'd met, the meals he'd created. Michael found himself opening up too, speaking of his long days at the office, his longing for something more meaningful. "The city can be a beast," Mark said, his voice soft. "But it's not all bad. You just have to find the quiet corners, the places where you can hear yourself think. That's what this place is for." As the night deepened, the string lights dimmed, and the rooftop seemed to glow with its own gentle magic. When Michael finally stood to leave, he felt lighter, as if he'd shed a weight he hadn't known he was carrying. "Come back any time," Mark said with a grin. "This place could use a regular visitor." Michael smiled. "Thanks, Mark. I think I will." Over the next weeks, Michael found himself returning to the rooftop sanctuary almost every evening. Sometimes Mark was there, ready with tea and conversation. Other times, Michael sat alone, letting the peace of the space wash over him. He began to see the city differently, not as an overwhelming cacophony, but as a living, breathing thing, filled with pockets of beauty waiting to be discovered. The rooftop became his refuge, a reminder that even in the busiest places, there is always room to breathe. And with each visit, Michael felt a little more at home, not just in the city, but in his own life. Michael's nightly visits to the rooftop sanctuary began to feel like a lifeline, a tether to something real in a world dominated by screens and deadlines. Each evening, as he ascended the rusted staircase, he felt as though he were shedding the weight of the day. The rooftop wasn't just a physical place, it became a canvas for introspection, imagination, and possibility. Mark, the retired chef who had created the sanctuary, gradually opened up more about his life. He spoke of his years traveling the country, learning regional dishes and the stories behind them. Each recipe, he explained, was more than a combination of ingredients, it was a memory, a piece of someone's heart. As he shared these tales, Mark would sometimes brew tea with ingredients grown on the rooftop, mint leaves, lavender, or chamomile. The simple act of sharing tea became a ritual, grounding Michael in the present moment. For Michael, the sanctuary wasn't just about peace, it was about rediscovery. The rooftop stirred something he hadn't felt in years, curiosity. He began to notice the small details in his surroundings, the way the wind carried the faint scent of rain, how the string lights flickered in sync with the breeze, or how the city seemed to hum a different tune when viewed from above. He even started to sketch again, pulling out an old notebook he hadn't touched in years. His drawings captured the patterns of light across the cityscape, the texture of the garden's potted plants, and Mark's weathered hands as they cradled a steaming mug. One evening, Mark was absent from the rooftop. Instead, Michael found a note pinned to the blue chair, "Gone to visit my daughter. Help yourself to the tea." Mark, for the first time, Michael had the sanctuary entirely to himself. Sitting under the string lights, he felt a strange blend of solitude and connection, as if the rooftop itself was alive and welcoming him. That night, he lingered longer than usual, lying on the worn wooden bench and staring up at the sky. The stars were faint, fighting against the city's glow, but they were there, a reminder that even in a place as chaotic as the city, beauty persisted if you looked closely enough. Michael thought about his life, his choices, and the quiet dreams he'd buried beneath the demands of his job. In the stillness, he made a promise to himself: he would seek out more moments like this, moments that made him feel alive. Over the weeks, Michael began to notice changes, not just within himself, but in how he viewed the world. The rooftop sanctuary had taught him to pay attention, to see the extraordinary in the ordinary. He found himself smiling at the barista who knew his coffee order, pausing to listen to street musicians, and exploring new neighborhoods on weekends. The city, once overwhelming, now felt like a tapestry of stories waiting to be discovered. Mark's tales of his culinary travels also sparked something in Michael. One weekend, inspired by Mark's stories, Michael visited a farmer's market and bought fresh ingredients to cook a meal from scratch, a rare departure from his usual takeout dinners. As he chopped vegetables and stirred a pot of soup, he thought of Mark's words about recipes being memories. For the first time in years, cooking felt like more than a chore, it felt like an act of creation. One crisp autumn evening, as the wind carried the scent of fallen leaves, Mark surprised Michael with a question. "What would you do if this rooftop were yours?" Michael blinked, caught off guard. "I don't know," he admitted. "I guess I'd want it to be a place where people could find what I found here: peace, connection, maybe even inspiration." Mark smiled, his eyes twinkling. "That's exactly why I built it. And maybe, one day, it will be yours." The idea planted itself in Michael's mind. The rooftop had become more than a retreat, it was a reminder of what life could be when he allowed himself to slow down and connect, with others, with himself, and with the world around him. He began to wonder how he could bring a little of that sanctuary to the rest of his life. The Skyline Sanctuary, deeper dive. Michael hadn't always felt trapped by the city. When he first arrived, he was brimming with optimism, ready to embrace its chaos as part of the adventure. But over time, the clamor dulled his enthusiasm. He buried himself in work, convincing himself that the grind was temporary. Yet months turned into years, and with every passing day, he felt himself drift further from the spark that had once defined him. The rooftop changed that. What began as an escape from noise became a place of clarity. Each night, as Michael ascended the old staircase, he felt himself entering a different world, a place unbound by schedules and expectations. The rooftop didn't just silence the noise of the city, it silenced the noise within him. A mirror to the past. One evening, as Michael sipped tea with Mark, the conversation turned to their lives before the sanctuary. Mark's stories of traveling, cooking, and connecting with people reminded Michael of his own past, the dreams he'd had as a younger man. He confessed to Mark that he once loved photography, that capturing moments had been his way of understanding the world. "But somewhere along the way, I stopped," Michael admitted. "Life got busy. It didn't seem practical anymore. Mark gave him a knowing look. Funny how we let the world convince us to stop doing the things that make us feel alive, he said. This sanctuary. I started building it after I retired. Thought I was too old for adventures. Turns out, I just needed to redefine what adventure meant. That night, Michael couldn't stop thinking about Mark's words. He dug through his closet and found his old camera, its battery long dead but its frame still intact. The next morning, he bought a new battery and began carrying the camera everywhere. At first, it felt strange, like trying to speak a language he'd forgotten. But as he started taking photos again, of the rooftop, the city streets, the faces of strangers, he felt a flicker of the joy he'd once known. The sanctuary also seemed to evolve with Michael. He began bringing small touches of his own to the space, a string of postcards he'd collected but never displayed, a battered book of poetry he'd loved in college, a small succulent he named Fred. These additions felt like pieces of himself, slowly reclaiming his connection to the world around him. One evening, Michael noticed something new on the rooftop. Mark had set up a small wooden sign near the entrance. It read, "Welcome to the Skyline Sanctuary, a quiet corner for dreamers." Michael smiled as he read it. "You're opening it up to others?" Mark nodded. "I've been thinking. The world could use more spaces like this. Quiet places where people can catch their breath. But I can't do it alone." There was a pause, the hum of the city filling the silence. Then Mark continued, "I was wondering if you'd want to help. You've got an eye for capturing the beauty in things. Maybe we can turn this into something bigger." The idea of expanding the sanctuary felt daunting but exciting. Together, Mark and Michael began brainstorming ways to share the rooftop with others, a small community night, where people could bring a book and sit under the string lights, an open mic evening for poetry and music, even an idea for a photography workshop, where Michael could teach others to see the city in a new light. Slowly, word began to spread. At first, it was just a handful of visitors, friends of Mark, neighbors who happened to see the faint glow of the string lights. But as the weeks went by, the sanctuary became a quiet refuge for more and more people. Each person who visited left something behind, a story, a memory, a shared laugh. The rooftop, once a hidden escape, became a living, breathing testament to the power of human connection. Months later, Michael stood on the rooftop alone, camera in hand. The sanctuary had grown into something he never could have imagined, a place where strangers became friends, where the city's chaos softened into a gentle rhythm. For Michael, it wasn't just a sanctuary anymore, it was a reminder of what life could be when he allowed himself to pause, to connect, to dream. As he gazed out at the skyline, now familiar yet ever-changing, he felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the rooftop, but for the journey that had led him there. He snapped a photo, capturing the sanctuary in all its quiet beauty. It was more than a picture, it was a promise to himself to keep chasing moments like this, to keep seeking the extraordinary in the ordinary. And as the string lights swayed gently in the breeze, Michael realized that the sanctuary wasn't just a place. It was a state of mind, a reminder that even in the noisiest corners of life, there's always room for peace. Winter arrived, draping the city in a quiet chill. The rooftop sanctuary, though still vibrant, took on a different character under the frosted touch of the season. The wind chimes sang softer melodies, and the potted plants rested under light blankets of snow. Michael began to wonder how the sanctuary could continue to serve its growing community through the colder months. One frosty evening, Michael climbed the stairs with a sketchpad tucked under his arm. He'd been mulling over ideas to expand the sanctuary, dreaming of ways to make it an all-weather retreat. When he reached the top, he was greeted by Mark, who was busy wrapping the garden's trees with twinkling fairy lights. "Thought you might be here," Mark said with a grin, his breath clouding in the crisp air. "The sanctuary's getting quite a following, you know. Seems we've stumbled onto something special." Michael nodded. "But how do we keep it alive in winter? The wind's too sharp, the snow too heavy." "I've been thinking, what if we created a sheltered space? Something simple, but warm." Mark raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Go on." Michael opened his sketchpad, revealing rough designs for a small, enclosed pavilion. It would have transparent walls to preserve the view of the city, a heated floor powered by solar panels, and benches for people to gather. At its heart, Michael envisioned a communal table where visitors could leave drawings, poems, or stories, a way to weave the community's spirit into the sanctuary itself. Mark studied the sketches, his eyes sparkling. "You've been holding out on me, Michael. This is brilliant." Over the following weeks, Mark and Michael worked together to bring the pavilion to life. They enlisted help from some of the sanctuary's regular visitors, a young architect who volunteered to refine the designs, a construction worker who sourced materials, and an artist who offered to paint a mural on the pavilion's back wall. It became a labor of love, a project that united the sanctuary's community in a way Michael hadn't anticipated. Even strangers passing by the alleyway stopped to lend a hand, drawn by the sense of purpose radiating from the group. When the pavilion was finally completed, it was a sight to behold. Its walls shimmered with frost in the morning light, and the mural, a swirling depiction of the city blending into the cosmos, captured the sanctuary's essence. Inside, the air was warm and inviting, and the communal table soon filled with scribbled notes, sketches, and photographs left behind by visitors. Michael took a step back, admiring the pavilion as the first snowflakes of the season began to fall. For the first time in years, he felt not just content, but proud. The rooftop sanctuary had become more than an escape, it was a testament to the power of shared dreams. As the months passed, the sanctuary's influence spread. Stories about the rooftop began circulating online, attracting visitors from beyond the neighborhood. Some came seeking peace, others searching for inspiration. Journalists wrote articles about it, calling it a hidden gem of the city, and even local artists began performing impromptu acoustic sets under the string lights. One evening, as Michael collected notes from the communal table, he found a letter addressed to him. It read, "Dear Michael, I've been coming to the sanctuary for weeks now, and I can't thank you enough for what you've built here. It's more than a place, it's a reminder that even in the busiest corners of life, we can find beauty and connection. Thank you for giving us a space to dream. Sincerely, a grateful visitor. Michael folded the letter carefully, tucking it into his pocket. It was a quiet affirmation of everything he had worked toward, a reminder that small acts of creation could ripple out and touch countless lives. One evening, as Mark and Michael sat in the pavilion, sipping tea and watching the city lights twinkle, Mark spoke. "You've turned this place into something I never imagined. I think it's time for me to step back and let you take the reins." Michael blinked, startled. "But this was your sanctuary first." Mark smiled, his face lined with the wisdom of years. "It was, but now it's ours. And soon, it'll be yours. You've got the vision to carry it forward, Michael. I'm just glad I got to see it become something so beautiful." Michael hesitated, the weight of Mark's words sinking in. But as he looked around, at the pavilion, the string lights, and the collection of memories etched into every corner of the sanctuary, he felt ready. The rooftop wasn't just a sanctuary anymore. It was a legacy. And Michael knew he would dedicate himself to ensuring it continued to thrive, offering a quiet refuge for anyone in need. The sanctuary was thriving, and with it, Michael found himself busier than ever. Visitors arrived not just from the neighborhood, but from across the city. Each brought something unique, a story, a talent, a memory, and each left a piece of themselves behind. The communal table was now a patchwork of thoughts, with sketches pinned over poems, pressed flowers taped next to Polaroid pictures, and even the occasional folded paper crane. But with growth came challenges. More visitors meant more upkeep. Michael found himself spending late nights repairing the pavilion, replanting herbs, and mending wind chimes that had weathered one too many storms. Yet, as tiring as it was, he couldn't imagine life without the sanctuary. It had become not only his retreat but a part of who he was. One chilly evening, as Michael cleaned up after a particularly lively poetry night, a familiar figure climbed the staircase. It was Sarah, an old friend from his college days, someone he hadn't seen in years. She paused at the top, taking in the soft glow of the string lights and the warm hum of conversations fading into the night. "Michael?" she called, her voice tinged with disbelief. Michael turned, a grin spreading across his face. "Sarah? What are you doing here?" "I heard about this place from a friend," she said, stepping closer. "I had no idea it was your place." Over tea, they caught up on the years they had spent apart. Sarah was an artist now, painting murals across the city, each one inspired by the places and people she encountered. When Michael told her about the sanctuary and how it had transformed his life, she smiled. "You know," she said, tracing the rim of her mug, "this is exactly the kind of place I've been searching for, a space where art and life collide." Have you ever thought about collaborating with other creators? Artists, musicians, writers, people who could breathe even more life into this rooftop. Michael leaned back, considering her words. The sanctuary had always been about connection, but he realized it could be more than a refuge. It could be a spark for creativity, a place where ideas bloomed as freely as the rooftop's plants. Michael leaned back, considering her words. The sanctuary had always been about connection, but he realized it could be more than a refuge. It could be a spark for creativity, a place where ideas bloomed as freely as the rooftop's plants. With Sarah's encouragement, Michael began reaching out to the city's creative community. He hosted art nights where painters covered the pavilion's walls with colorful murals that reflected the city's soul. Musicians performed acoustic sets under the string lights, their melodies blending with the sanctuary's quiet hum. Writers organized storytelling circles, weaving tales that echoed across the rooftops. The sanctuary became a hub of inspiration, a place where people came not only to find peace but to create and share. And Michael, who once felt adrift in the city, found himself at the heart of something greater than he had ever imagined. As the sanctuary flourished, Michael occasionally longed for the quieter nights he once knew, the evenings when it was just him, the string lights, and the city's soft hum. Mark noticed this and pulled him aside one evening. "You've done something incredible here," Mark said, handing Michael a steaming mug of tea. "But don't forget, this place started as a sanctuary for you. It's okay to claim those quiet moments when you need them." Michael took Mark's advice to heart. He began setting aside one evening a week where the sanctuary was closed to visitors, a time when he could sit alone under the stars and reconnect with the peace that had drawn him there in the first place. Over time, the sanctuary's impact spread far beyond its rooftop. Inspired by Michael's efforts, other rooftops across the city began transforming into sanctuaries of their own. What had once been empty, forgotten spaces now bloomed with life: gardens, art installations, quiet retreats. The city, once overwhelming, began to hum with a new kind of energy, one rooted in connection and creativity. Michael often visited these new sanctuaries, finding inspiration in the ways others had interpreted the idea. He started photographing them, capturing the essence of each space and the people who brought them to life. His photos turned into a collection, and eventually, an exhibit titled "The City's Quiet Corners." The exhibit opened on a crisp autumn evening, drawing a crowd that filled the gallery with laughter and conversation. As Michael wandered through the space, he overheard people sharing stories about their own connections to the sanctuaries. Each story felt like a thread, weaving together a tapestry of hope and renewal. Years later, Michael stood on the sanctuary's rooftop, now weathered but more vibrant than ever. The pavilion's walls were a kaleidoscope of murals, the string lights swayed gently in the breeze, and the communal table brimmed with new additions. Mark had retired to a quiet seaside town, but his spirit lingered in every corner of the sanctuary. A young man climbed the staircase, his eyes wide with wonder as he took in the space. He approached Michael hesitantly, holding a camera much like the one Michael had used years ago. "Hi," the man said, his voice shy but eager. "I heard about this place and I was wondering if it's okay to take some photos." Michael smiled, recognizing a familiar spark in the man's eyes. "Of course," he said. "This place is yours as much as it's mine." As the young man began snapping photos, Michael leaned on the railing and looked out at the city. The light stretched endlessly, a shimmering reminder that even in the busiest places, there's always room for quiet moments, for connection, for dreaming. And as the sanctuary filled with laughter and music, Michael felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that its story, his story, would continue to inspire for years to come. The sanctuary was no longer just a place, it was a heartbeat, a rhythm intertwined with the city that pulsed below. Michael felt it in every creak of the rooftop stairs, in every murmur of stories shared around the communal table. What had started as a hidden refuge had become a living, breathing part of the city, yet somehow, its magic still felt deeply personal. Winter crept into the sanctuary gently, frosting the edges of its life but never dimming its glow. The garden's vibrant greens faded into softer hues, while the pavilion became a warm cocoon beneath strings of twinkling lights. Inside, the table overflowed with offerings, sketches pinned alongside handwritten poems, pressed flowers mingling with Polaroids of smiles frozen in time. Each contribution was a thread in a larger tapestry, woven not just by hands but by shared experiences and dreams. Michael's days were busier than ever, filled with emails from curious visitors, hurried repairs to the sanctuary, and late-night brainstorming sessions with Mark. Yet he found solace in the work, a rare satisfaction that reminded him why this space had captivated his heart in the first place. One evening, as Michael worked alone beneath the pavilion's shelter, a familiar voice drifted through the crisp night air. He turned to see Sarah, her silhouette outlined by the glow of the city skyline. It had been years since they'd last spoken, but the warmth in her smile was the same. "I almost didn't believe it when I heard about this place," she said, stepping into the light. "This sanctuary. It's incredible." Michael offered her tea, and they settled into the chairs near the wind chimes. As they talked, memories of late-night college conversations and shared creative aspirations resurfaced, filling the air with a bittersweet nostalgia. "I'm glad you found this, Michael," Sarah said. "It's everything you used to talk about: connection, meaning, a place to create. Have you thought about expanding it? Bringing in more voices, more artists?" Her words lingered long after she left. That night, Michael pulled out his sketchpad, not to plan repairs but to imagine possibilities. He saw murals dancing across the pavilion's walls, heard the faint echo of music filling the air, and felt the sanctuary becoming a true hub for creativity and inspiration. Sarah's suggestion sparked a new chapter for the sanctuary. Michael reached out to the city's creative community, inviting them to breathe their own energy into the space. Art nights transformed the pavilion's interior into a kaleidoscope of murals, each capturing a unique facet of the city's soul. Musicians brought acoustic sets that wove melodies into the rooftop's gentle hum. Writers gathered for storytelling circles, their words mingling with the wind to create an invisible yet palpable magic. The sanctuary began to take on a life of its own, shaped by every person who entered its embrace. Michael watched as strangers became collaborators, as the quiet refuge he'd once cherished turned into a spark for something far greater. With growth came challenges. The sanctuary's expansion demanded Michael's attention, pulling him in countless directions. The rooftop was thriving, yet Michael couldn't ignore a quiet ache, the longing for the solitude that had first drawn him there. Mark, ever perceptive, noticed the tension in Michael's expression one evening. "This place started as a sanctuary for you," he said, handing Michael a mug of tea. "Don't let its growth take that away." It's okay to pause. This city moves fast enough as it is. Mark's words struck a chord. Michael began setting aside one evening a week where the sanctuary closed its gates, leaving the rooftop quiet and still. On these nights, he'd sit under the string lights, camera in hand, capturing the way the pavilion glowed softly against the night sky. These moments reminded him that growth didn't mean losing sight of stillness. Word of the sanctuary spread across the city, inspiring others to transform their own spaces. Rooftops that had once been forgotten became vibrant gardens, art galleries, and quiet retreats. Michael found himself visiting these sanctuaries, each one a reflection of its creator's vision. He began photographing them, capturing the quiet magic that thrived in the city's hidden corners. The photos turned into a collection, and eventually, an exhibit, the city's quiet corners. On the opening night, as Michael stood in the gallery surrounded by friends, strangers, and Mark, still wearing his signature patchwork vest, he felt a wave of gratitude. The sanctuary was no longer just his, it was part of a larger movement, proof that even in the busiest places, there was room for connection. Years later, Michael stood on the rooftop alone, the faint hum of the city stretching endlessly below. The sanctuary, now weathered but thriving, bore the marks of countless lives. The pavilion's walls, once blank, were a vivid collage of stories. The string lights swayed gently, their soft glow illuminating the communal table that still brimmed with sketches and letters. A young man climbed the stairs, hesitating at the top. In his hand was a camera, its strap worn but sturdy. "Hi," he said shyly, his breath forming clouds in the winter air. "I heard about this place, Anne. I wanted to see it for myself." Michael smiled, recognizing the same spark of curiosity that had led him to the sanctuary years ago. "Welcome," he said, stepping aside to let the young man take in the view. "This place belongs to anyone who needs it." As the young man began taking photos, Michael leaned on the railing, watching as the city lights stretched endlessly into the horizon. He felt a quiet peace settle over him, knowing that the sanctuary, and its story, would continue to inspire long after he was gone. The sanctuary had grown beyond Michael's wildest dreams, but he knew all things must evolve. He spent one final evening on the rooftop, alone beneath the string lights, reflecting on the years that had shaped both him and the space. The city hummed softly in the distance, its chaos no longer overwhelming but comforting, a symphony he had come to understand. Michael held his camera, the one that had reignited his creative spark, and took a photograph of the sanctuary as it was in that moment. The pavilion, adorned with its vivid murals, the wind chimes singing softly in the breeze, the communal table overflowing with memories, all captured in a frame that he knew would last even as time moved forward. The next morning, he locked the rooftop gate for the last time. But Michael wasn't closing the sanctuary, he was passing it on. He left a note pinned to the pavilion: "This place belongs to everyone who dreams. Take care of it as you would your own heart." Michael's departure wasn't an ending, it was a continuation. He carried the sanctuary's lessons with him as he traveled to new cities, seeking out forgotten spaces and breathing life into them. Everywhere he went, he left behind small sanctuaries, little sparks of hope and connection, proving that peace could exist anywhere if nurtured. And though he no longer returned to the original rooftop, Michael knew it remained alive in the hands of those who had found solace there. The sanctuary had become more than a place, it was a movement, a testament to the power of quiet moments in a noisy world. Years later, a young dreamer climbed the rusty staircase for the first time, drawn by whispers of a rooftop garden hidden above the city. As they reached the top, they paused, taking in the soft glow of the string lights, the colorful murals, and the gentle hum of wind chimes. It felt like stepping into a dream, one that promised hope, connection, and endless possibilities. And so, the sanctuary's story continued, never truly ending, always alive in the hearts of those who found it. Thank you for being a part of Calm Cloud Chronicles. What kind of stories help you relax the most? Please let us know in comments below. If you enjoyed this story, let us know by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Until next time, stay peaceful and keep dreaming.